So this is the second video dealing with Intelligence Community Directive 203, which lays out standards for intelligence analysis that affect the entire intelligence community. The first of those videos talked about sort of the overarching standards. This one is going to focus more on the standards of tradecraft, which is sort of the last item in that list, and we'll go into those in much greater detail and talk about sort of what's going on. So just a quick refresher, Intelligence Community Directive 203 sets out standards for the entire intelligence community, suggesting that what analysts should be producing should be timely, right, useful to consumers because it reaches them in the time frame that they need, objective, right, not sort of riddled through with bias, but we're trying to manage and control that bias, independent of political considerations, right? So you shouldn't be bringing your own political views to the table. Likewise, it should not be, the analysis should not be resulting from pressure from policymakers on analysts to produce particular outcomes. It should be complete and that it's using all possible sources, and then appropriate tradecraft should be employed. And so we'll talk about that appropriate tradecraft here today and the 9 or so elements that are identified as constituting good tradecraft that should be incorporated where possible in these kind of analyses. Because this is sort of an actual policy document, I'm going to be reading large chunks of text, which I normally don't do on PowerPoints because it's bad practice. But here I'll kind of run through it quickly, and I'll talk about what I think are the interesting takeaways from the policy language. So the first standard is properly describes quality and credibility of underlying sources, data, and methodologies. And the language is analytic products should identify underlying sources and methodologies upon which judgments are based and use source descriptors in accordance with ICD 206, sourcing requirements for disseminated analytic products. So I read through 206, and it's primarily about how do you cite your sources, how do you communicate the reliability or concerns you might have about your sources, and provide that as additional documentation alongside your analysis. So if you're curious what that is, that's what that's referring to. You should do that. To describe factors affecting source quality and credibility. Such factors can include accuracy and completeness, possible denial and deception, age and continued currency of information, and technical elements of collection, as well as source access, validation, motivation, possible bias, or expertise. Source summary statements described in ICD 206 are strongly encouraged and should be used to provide a holistic assessment of the strengths or weaknesses in the source base and explain which sources are most important to key analytic judgments. So being clear about your sources, being critically reflective of your sources, and communicating that information to policymakers is good practice. Second piece, properly expresses and explains uncertainties associated with major analytic judgments. So analytic products should indicate and explain the basis for uncertainties associated with major analytic judgments, specifically the likelihood of occurrence of an event or development and the analyst's confidence in the basis for this judgment. Degrees of likelihood encompass a full spectrum from remote to near certain. Analysts' confidence in an assessment or judgment may be based on the logic and evidentiary base that underpin it, including the quality and quantity of source material and their understanding of the topic. Analytic products should note causes of uncertainty, such as type, currency, and amount of information, knowledge gaps, and the nature of the issue, and explain how uncertainties affect the analysis. So to what degree does the judgment depend on assumptions? And there's a little bit more here. There's actually quite a bit more here. As appropriate, products should identify indicators that would alter the levels of uncertainty for major analytic judgments, consistency in terms used, and supporting information about logic advanced is crucial to success in explaining uncertainty, regardless of whether the likelihood or confidence expressions are used. For expressions of likelihood or probability, an analytic product must use the following sets of terms. Okay, so I'm going to stop here and unpack a few things. So the first thing is that there's two types of uncertainty that might exist around an analytic judgment. There is the uncertainty that you might have around the outcomes that you're forecasting. So if you ask me how likely do I think it is that Iran will completely trash the nuclear agreement and resume its nuclear weapons development in the next year, I might put that assessment at 25%. That's a 25% likelihood. I think it's more likely that they'll drag out renegotiation. I'm going to put that at about 50, 55, 60%, and then I could fill in the remaining 20 or 30% with other possible outcomes, right? So I'm providing probability estimates around the possible things that Iran could be doing, and there's some uncertainty about that because it's not 100% sure that it's going to go one way or another. So that's one kind of probability estimate. The other kind of uncertainty or probability estimate you could ask me about is, how confident are you in those assessments? Those numbers that you just cited, how confident are you? And I might shuffle my feet and say, well, I don't have a lot of information. This is kind of my gut assessment of kind of watching this for a while, but I don't have anything specific. So if you had to ask me specifically how confident I am, I'd say I'd sort of confident, reasonably confident, maybe a little uncertain. But maybe if I had really detailed information, I could give you much greater confidence in my estimates about what I think would happen. And so those are two distinct types of language about uncertainty, and we're being asked to talk about that uncertainty clearly using this sort of table and specific terms about how likely things are and how certain we are. But we're also being asked to express those statements about probability about two very different kinds of things. And so I think it's worth recognizing that that's going on here. And then there's some suggestions for how to communicate around that. So analysts are strongly encouraged not to mix terms from different rows. So that's referring to this table where there's rows that use language of likelihood and language, likelihood and certainty. And then in addition to not mixing terms, products that do mix terms must include a disclaimer clearly noting the terms indicate the same assessment of probability. So if you are going to mix your language, make sure that you're not adding undue confusion around that. And the second piece of this, of how to communicate around this clearly, is to avoid confusion. Products that express an analyst's confidence in an assessment or judgment using confidence level, so I have high confidence, must not combine a confidence level and a degree of likelihood, which refers to an event or development. So I should keep those two statements, what I think is going to happen and how likely those things are, versus how confident am I in my assessment. I need to keep those very separate and not mix them in the same sentence at a minimum, because that can create uncertainty in the mind of a policymaker, where they might be thinking that my high level of certainty about my own judgment is translating into a high level of certainty in the outcome I'm predicting, which might not actually be the case. Okay, properly distinguishes between underlying intelligence information and analysts' assumptions and judgments. So I'm going to begin with just the definitions here, because these are kind of plugged into the middle of the text, and I thought I'd pull them out and make sure we're clear on that before going through the sort of instructions. So assumptions are defined as suppositions used to frame or support an argument. Assumptions affect analytic interpretation of underlying intelligence information. So I may have some assumptions about the motives of Vladimir Putin, for example. I don't have data to get inside his mind, but I could have, based on a psychobiological profile of a leader, I could have maybe some ideas about what he might be motivated by and what might be his goals. But I'm bringing those assumptions to the table, and I'm using those to sort of work with my information, and then I'm using those to build judgments. And judgments are defined as conclusions based on the underlying information, intelligence information, analysis, and assumptions. So judgments are what come when I sort of merge all of that together and say, here's what I think is going to happen. Okay, so we'll return to sort of the actual wording. Analytic products should clearly distinguish statements that convey underlying intelligence information used in analysis from statements that convey assumptions or judgments. So again, if I have a report on somebody who's talking about what they heard Vladimir Putin say in private, that should be clearly flagged as I have information on this, versus I have an assumption based on what I think about Vladimir Putin and how his mindset works that I'm sort of mapping into this story that I'm telling you. You want to make sure that those two things are understood as separate and distinct. Products should state assumptions explicitly when they serve as a linchpin of an argument or when they bridge key information gaps. So we'll be talking in subsequent videos about how to identify assumptions that are really the critical assumptions, that if you're wrong on that, the whole thing falls apart. But you definitely want to make that clear when you do identify those linchpin assumptions, that those are available for policymakers to sort of reflect on and know that this is a critical jump that we're making in how we're working with the information. Products should explain the implications for judgments if assumptions prove to be incorrect. Products also should, as appropriate, identify indicators that, if detected, would alter judgments. And so we can, again, in subsequent videos, we'll talk about how to do some of that. Incorporates analysis of alternatives. Analysis of alternatives is the systematic evaluation of differing hypotheses to explain events or phenomena, explore near-term outcomes, and imagine possible futures to mitigate surprise and risk. Analytic products should identify and assess plausible alternative hypotheses. This is particularly important when major judgments must contend with significant uncertainties or complexity, such as forecasting future trends, or when low probability events could produce high impact results. In discussing alternatives, products should address factors such as associated assumptions, likelihood, or implications related to U.S. interests. Products also should identify indicators that, if detected, would affect the likelihood of identified alternatives. So there's a variety of structured analytic techniques that help us to get at various different possible ways that things could go and assessing sort of the likelihood of those different possibilities, which is really important because human beings have a tendency to sort of assume that they know what's happening and then stack up information behind that sort of initial reaction and discover, oh, look, I have all of this information that seems to corroborate my story or my understanding of events. I must be right. And we can miss that a lot of that information that seems to be corroborative could actually support other hypotheses or other outcomes and isn't actually quite as compelling as we've led ourselves to believe it is, because we've only looked at one possible options. And so this is sort of pushing analysts to think sort of broadly about what are the various different things that could happen and to talk about those different things in terms of the evidence. So my example earlier of if I was asked to make a forecast about what I think is going to happen with Iran's nuclear program, I'd sort of highlighted, well, it could be this way, it could be this way, or it could be this way, which is what you should be doing in terms of presenting an analysis of multiple hypotheses as part of your forming of a judgment and assessment. Demonstrates customer relevance and addresses implications. Analytic products should provide information and insight on issues relevant to customers of U.S. intelligence and address the implications of information and analysis they provide. Products should add value by addressing prospects, context, threats, and factors affecting opportunities for action. So we want intelligence to be used by policymakers. We want them to find it useful. We want them to feel that it's providing things that help them to navigate the world and make better decisions. And so that should be front and center in how we are writing and how we are thinking about what we present to get the maximum use by policymakers from the information that's provided, or for policymakers to believe that it has helped improve their assessment and their judgment and their policymaking, and find value in what we're doing. Uses clear and logical argumentation. I think this is just good advice, although we'll talk about critical thinking and what this can look like in a subsequent video. Analytic products should present a clear main analytic message up front. Products containing multiple judgments should have a main analytic message that is drawn collectively from those judgments. All analytic judgments should be effectively supported by relevant information and coherent reasoning. Language and syntax should convey meaning unambiguously. Products should be internally consistent and acknowledge significant supporting and contrary information affecting judgments. So good reasoning, which we can talk about, but then a lot of other elements of this are about how you write and how you present that information, and making sure that there's a coherent thesis to what you're producing so that a policymaker understands here's the main takeaway, that there's not a secondary message somewhere else that you might miss. If there are secondary messages, they should be feeding into and supporting the main takeaway message of a intelligence product. If you have multiple judgments that you want a policymaker to be aware of, it is better, probably given this standard, to produce two products, each with a separate judgment, so that those judgments can be processed by policymakers who are looking for that one main takeaway, who've been trained to assume that everything feeds into a thesis, and all of the subsequent pieces underneath it are not distinct ideas pointing us in a different direction, but are all building to support that main thesis or highlighting uncertainty around that thesis, depending on what the information says. Okay, explains change to or consistency of analytic judgments. Analytic products should state how their major judgments on a topic are consistent with or represent a change from those in previously published analyses, or represent initial coverage of a topic. Products need not be lengthy or detailed in explaining change or consistency. They should avoid using boilerplate language. However, they should make clear how new information or different reasoning led to judgments expressed in them. And so there's another piece to this, but I'll just begin by simply saying policymakers will assume continuity, and they want to be either reassured in that, or you want to flag for them when continuity no longer works, and explain why we think an updating of your judgment is important at this particular time. So that's going to be important to just make sure that policymakers know they can keep using what they have or not. Recurrent products such as daily crisis reports should note any changes in judgments. Absent changes, recurrent products need not confirm consistency with previous editions. Significant differences in analytic judgments, such as between two intelligence community analytic elements, should be fully considered and brought to the attention of customers. So if you're producing something every day, you don't need to say every day, and nothing has changed from yesterday. However, you should flag when things do change from yesterday in that kind of a communication mode. The other piece here is that we're assuming that everybody's on the same page within the intelligence community, and if you have two different assessments coming out of different sort of parts of the intelligence community, those analytic elements, that should be brought to the attention of policymakers, so that they're aware that within the intelligence community there is disagreement, because that might point to a change in a situation or might warrant a reconsideration. Number 8, makes accurate judgments and assessments. This is just good practice. Analytic products should apply expertise and logic to make the most accurate judgments and assessments possible based on the information available and known information gaps. Doing so, analytic products should present all judgments that would be useful to customers and should not avoid difficult judgments in order to minimize the risk of being wrong. Continue with that. Inherent to the concept of accuracy is that an analytic message a customer receives should be one the analyst intended to send. Therefore, analytic products should express judgments as clearly and precisely as possible, reducing ambiguity by addressing the likelihood, timing, and nature of an outcome or development. Clarity of meaning permits assessments for accuracy when all necessary information is available. So I think there's two parts here. Part one is you should strive to get it right, and you should strive to be accurate and complete in your judgment. But part two is not hedging your bets when communicating that to policymakers, even if it's not what policymakers necessarily want to hear, even if you're worried because you have high uncertainty that you're going to be blamed for getting things wrong. That it's important to be very clear in terms of what you can say and what you can't say, and the limits of what that information is telling you. Okay, and then the last piece is that analytic products should incorporate visual information to clarify an analytic message and to complement or enhance the presentation of data and analysis. In particular, visual presentations should be used when information or concepts such as spatial or temporal relationships can be conveyed better in graphical form, such as tables, flowcharts, images, than written text. Visual information may range from plain presentation of intelligence information to interactive displays for complex information and analytic concepts. All of the content in an analytic product may be presented visually. Visual information should always be clear and pertinent to the product subject. Analytic content and visual information should also adhere to all other analytic tradecraft standards. So graphs are good, tables are good, maps are good. People process information through those other kind of mediums very well oftentimes, and they're maybe less likely to miss it than dense blocks of text. So we should use that when we can and when it's helpful, recognizing that all of the tradecraft standards continue to apply, and it may be the most appropriate method for some types of information. Okay, so there's a lot going on here in terms of these various different components of what constitutes good tradecraft, what a good intelligence analysis product would look like. I'm not always convinced that these standards point us in the same direction as good, clear writing or rhetoric would suggest, in part because the intelligence community is trying to present the uncertainty. to present the unknowns, to make very clear the assumptions that are going into things. Where I think most of the time when we write different styles that are persuasive, we're maybe not trying to undercut our arguments as thoroughly as maybe the intelligence standards laid out in 203 would push analysts to do. And part of that is just the professional responsibility of making sure that policymakers are aware of all of the gaps and all the potholes in a judgment, so that they can decide how to work with that information and the lack of information, fully informed of what's there and what's not there.